Hi Musitrature recaps here. Today I'm going to explain a movie called Compliance. The movie, based on true events, recounts the tale of a fast food restaurant. The manager, Sandra, faces a challenge when she accepts a delivery of goods after an employee forgets to close the refrigerator door, causing some products to spoil. The losses amount to nearly $1,500, and they're particularly short on bacon and cucumbers. As Sandra handles the delivery, her employees, Becky, Kevin, and others, begin their workday and prepare for the busy Friday shift. They all gather in the kitchen to discuss the day ahead. Fridays are always bustling, so Sandra emphasizes the need for everyone to be attentive. Cooks are expected to use the limited supplies wisely, and cashiers must maintain order at their stations. Sandra knows they're being watched closely, so they need to avoid mistakes that could lead to fines. With the head manager, Robert, falling ill, the responsibility falls on Sandra's shoulders. After assigning tasks and reminding them about the refrigerator incident, she officially starts the workday. The day starts slow with few customers, giving Becky and Marty time to chat about personal matters. Sandra aims to be friendly with her employees and even shares news about Van's proposal to her. Though happy for her, the girls find Sandra a bit peculiar. As the number of customers increases, so do the challenges, making Sandra anxious. Eventually, Van calls her to let her know he'll be out with a friend for a fun Friday night. In a short while, Sandra receives word that an unidentified caller is asking for her at the restaurant. Officer Daniels is on the line and informs her that one of the checkout employees is accused of stealing money from a customer. The description matches young Becky, prompting Sandra to summon her. Daniels reveals that the head, Robert, is also aware of the situation and emphasizes the need for a swift resolution. Trusting the officer's authority, Sandra questions Becky about the incident. However, Becky denies any involvement. Daniels then asks to speak to Becky directly and attempts to pressure her into confessing. Despite the pressure, Becky maintains her innocence, insisting that she didn't take anyone's money. Daniels remains suspicious of Becky and instructs Sandra to take the phone away from her to prevent her from making calls. He then asks about Becky's bag and requests a search of her personal belongings. Following the officer's directives, Sandra heads to the staff room to examine Becky's bag. While Becky tries to convince Sandra of her innocence, the manager remains skeptical and warns of potential termination if the theft is confirmed. Sandra is torn about whether Becky could be guilty. Daniels advises Sandra not to worry, assuring her that he takes full responsibility for her actions. Engaging with Becky once more, Daniels tries to exert pressure on her and demands respect. He insists that she addresses him as "Sir" to avoid trouble. After complying, Becky continues to assert her innocence, but Daniels remains skeptical. He then informs Sandra that they have two choices: either the police will come to arrest Becky, take her to the station, and send her to jail, or Sandra can assist in finding the stolen money to resolve the situation. Worried about tarnishing the restaurant's reputation and avoiding legal issues, Sandra agrees to help the investigation. Becky realizes she has no alternative and agrees to a search, but she insists that two people be present during the process. Daniels communicates with Robert, who's on hold, and agrees to the manager and cashier's condition. Following the officer's instructions, Sandra asks Marty to join them in the screening room. Becky removes her outer clothing and hands it over to the manager. After a thorough search yields nothing, Daniels asks Becky to remove her underwear, as thieves sometimes use hidden pockets in undergarments to stash stolen items. Sandra, adhering to Daniels' instructions, requests that Becky remove her underwear and checks it thoroughly, confirming that there's no money hidden there either. Marty is taken aback by the situation and provides Becky with an apron for modesty. Finding no evidence, Sandra is perplexed when Daniels orders her to put all the money in a bag and place it on the front seat of her own car. Daniels explains that this approach will allow the police to conduct a thorough search without causing a scene in the restaurant. Sandra's suspicions toward the officer grow, as his requests strike her as peculiar. Daniels then reveals that Becky's brother is under suspicion for dealing illegal substances, and traces of a suspicious substance were found on Becky's belongings. The authorities are currently searching their house, and only Sandra has the power to prevent Becky from facing jail time. Adhering to Daniels' instructions, Sandra gathers Becky's belongings in a bag, effectively denying her access to them. She places the bag in her car's front seat and leaves the door unlocked. Upon returning to the restaurant, Sandra confronts irate customers and heads to the kitchen to address the chef. With the number of patrons increasing, she dispatches Marty to attend to them, promising to join her shortly. Amid the bustle, and with Becky needing supervision, Sandra assigns Kevin to the task. When Daniels contacts Kevin and explains the situation, Kevin is reluctant to comply with the officer's demands. Having personal knowledge of Becky's brother and being confident in their innocence, he treats Daniels disrespectfully. Daniels continues to pose peculiar inquiries, focusing on Becky's appearance and attire. Recognizing that something doesn't add up, Kevin ends his conversation with the officer and refuses to watch over Becky. Sandra is disappointed by Kevin's behavior, but she continues to converse with Daniels, following his instructions. The officer notices that Kevin isn't proving to be a reliable aide and begins to suspect his potential involvement in the situation. Despite this suspicion, Sandra staunchly defends Kevin, asserting that she has no doubts about him. While Daniels, who isn't truly conducting a house search but rather making a sandwich in the restaurant's kitchen, queries Sandra about her marital status. Sandra reveals that she has a fiancé named Van. Daniels requests that she call Van, asking him to keep an eye on Becky since Sandra trusts him completely. As the evening progresses, the influx of customers continues to rise, and Sandra finds herself increasingly occupied with managing the dining area to ensure customer satisfaction. Eventually, Van arrives, having enjoyed a few drinks with a friend, leaving him slightly tipsy. Relying on her trust in Van, Sandra escorts him to a private area and explains the situation, requesting him to watch over Becky. She informs him that she's currently on the phone with the officer and hands it over to Van. Quickly gaining Van's confidence, Daniels engages in conversation, inquiring about Becky's appearance and her attire. The officer asks Van to instruct Becky to remove her apron so that she can discreetly hide the allegedly stolen money underneath it. Their discussion is cut short by Sandra's return, yet Daniels assures her that Van is effectively fulfilling his role and kindly requests her not to intervene. The manager's plate is full, so she heads back to the floor and assures Becky that she'll return later, despite the employee's pleas for assistance. As soon as Sandra departs, Daniels once again pressures Van to instruct Becky to take off her apron. Van seems uncertain and lacks conviction, prompting the officer to take matters into his own hands and directly address Becky. Daniels resorts to threatening her with jail time, vowing to orchestrate her arrest unless she complies. Faced with the realization that she's bound to be searched regardless, and recognizing the dire consequences ahead, Becky reluctantly submits. She agrees to adhere to both Van and the officer's demands. Becky removes her apron under Daniels' instructions, enabling him to scrutinize her breasts and provide a description of her nipples to Van. Following this, the police officer directs Van to instruct Becky to bend over, allowing him to check whether she's concealed the alleged stolen money on her person. Continuing to follow the instructions of both men, Becky anxiously hops in place, concerned that the stolen bills might slip out from her. Daniels takes satisfaction in how well the cashier and Van are complying with his demands, as they converse over the phone. Meanwhile, Kevin's skepticism grows. He contacts a friend and receives a text message indicating that Becky's brother is out of town. Sandra returns to the back room to check on Van and Becky's progress. She notices the girl putting on an apron, raising suspicions that something might have occurred. Grabbing the phone, the manager converses with the police officer, who assures her that everything is fully under control. Becky tries to interject and plea for help, but Sandra interprets it as rudeness and disrespect, leading her to perceive the cashier's behavior negatively. Recognizing that Van and Daniels have things handled, Sandra returns to her other responsibilities. Meanwhile, a customer who called the fast food restaurant finds his account balance depleted. He hurries back home, replenishes the funds, and contacts Van, citing complications encountered during the search of Becky's residence. Kevin and Marty's doubts about the unfolding situation continue to intensify, although no one seeks their opinions. At the same time, Daniels instructs Van to spank Becky for her perceived misbehavior and disrespectful attitude toward Sandra. The officer then communicates directly with Becky, ordering her to first comply and then perform a kind gesture for Van as a way to make up for her alleged wrongdoing. The police officer desires to capture all that unfolds in the back room, so Van agrees to position the phone on Becky's back. He instructs Becky to stretch out, enabling Daniels to hear every detail. Van takes pleasure in the absolute compliance, and his aroused state leads him to exploit Becky. Shortly after, Sandra returns and is taken aback by Van's altered state. Taking the phone, she interacts with the policeman, who reports that things have gone even better than expected. Van's performance was impressive, but he's now exhausted, and the officer suggests he be allowed to leave. Sandra reluctantly releases Van, who sits in his car, reflecting on his foolish actions. With Van gone, Harold, who typically only works during the day, returns to the fast food restaurant. Realizing she's free, Sandra seeks Harold's help and leads him to the back room. Meanwhile, Becky surveys her surroundings and notices the numerous cameras throughout the restaurant, including the room she's in. Daniels engages with Harold, attempting to start anew. However, Harold has no intention of participating in such games and discerns that this is not how the police conduct themselves. He shares his insights with Sandra. Kevin and Marty also side with Harold, sensing that this situation is far from normal. Doubts begin to surface in Sandra's mind, prompting her to contact the owner to verify if he truly communicated with the officer. Unbeknownst to anyone, Robert is unwell and resting at home, thus, he hasn't spoken to anyone and isn't familiar with anyone named Daniels. Sandra resumes her conversation with the officer, demanding an explanation. Daniels admits that it was a prank by a phone troublemaker and abruptly hangs up. Real law enforcement becomes aware of the incident and arrives at the restaurant to collect statements from witnesses. They also speak to Becky and gather CCTV footage as part of their investigation. Detective Niels is taken aback by the sheer foolishness displayed by people who blindly obeyed an unknown caller's commands. Meanwhile, the prankster calmly stashes away the phones and reunites with his young daughter, who has just returned from her grandmother's house. Detective Niels grapples with deciphering the identity of the prankster, attempting to trace the phone number's origin. Discovering the state where the SIM card was purchased, he collaborates with another officer. As they delve deeper, it becomes evident that this isn't an isolated incident. Utilizing surveillance footage, they manage to locate and apprehend the prankster. Becky decides to take legal action against Sandra, holding her responsible for losing her job. However, her attorney suggests targeting the fast food restaurant for a potentially lucrative lawsuit. Sandra is invited to a television show where she is questioned about the incident. She portrays herself as a victim alongside Becky, artfully evading the host's inquiries and persistently denying any accusations. And with that, the movie comes to a close. Thank you for watching.